Schizophrenia, as defined by the National Alliance on Mental Illness, is a mental illness that interferes with a person's ability to think clearly, manage emotions, make decisions, and relate to others. For this project, we're focusing on how schizophrenia affects an individual's ability to clearly make decisions, as opposed to someone without schizophrenia. First, we'll look into how analogies and metaphors are related to one's ability to make decisions. Let's start with an example. Imagine you just got a job at a coffee shop as a waitress. A couple qualities of a good waiter or waitress is someone who can engage the customers, keep track of their order, and make sure that they have everything they need during their time at the coffee shop. As a person with schizophrenia, it becomes increasingly difficult to learn how to effectively complete the job. One day, a customer gets rather annoyed when you bring him the wrong order. Typically, situations like this can be dealt with by using an analogy or metaphor. You can easily go through past memories in which you've had to deal with an angry person and are able to compare that situation to the current situation in order to make an appropriate decision. You learn how to address someone that is angry because you've done it before. People with schizophrenia find the task of empathizing with others rather difficult. This being one of the reasons that people with schizophrenia find it difficult to maintain relationships and jobs. The use of analogies and metaphors is increasingly useful in decision making. Individuals can use these past experiences and compare them to the situations they're facing at a certain moment in time.
Another key problem that schizophrenics have is issues involving positive reinforcement. For those who don't know, one theory on why schizophrenia occurs involves abnormalities in the dopamine receptors in a schizophrenic's brain. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter and a hormone that is associated with acts of pleasure, and in this theory it is hypothesized that the schizophrenic brain has trouble processing dopamine in a way that a quote-unquote normal brain uses dopamine. This leads to dopamine playing too much of a role in some areas of the brain and too minor of a role in others. One of the largest issues this causes involves positive learning. Specifically, they don't feel drive to pursue behaviors that have a probable high reward, which makes positive reinforcement a very ineffective tool when dealing with the schizophrenic mind. Imagine that you're training a pet, and the pet doesn't care whether you call him or her good or give them treats. Instead, this pet keeps trying to learn new behaviors and is only able to learn by using negative reinforcement. They might eventually become housebroken by simple process of trying to use the bathroom everywhere in the house and getting told that that's not acceptable, but teaching a command like sit would be an incredibly difficult process.
For my section, we're going to look at how schizophrenia affects a person's theory of self and others. First off, let's define theory of mind as the capacity to infer one's own and other person's mental states. There have been lots of experiments done on the various aspects of self-perception, but we'll only have time to gloss over a couple of them. Forgive me if I go a little quickly here, but we'll slow down to explain at the end. Experiment 1. Subjects are given different pictures of themselves and other people. On the presentation of each image, they are asked to quickly identify if the picture is familiar or unfamiliar. Schizophrenic patients more often misidentified pictures of themselves as unfamiliar. Experiment 2. Subjects would move their hand and observe an alien hand, something robotic or computer generated, that they then had to identify if the actions the hand was doing was being controlled by themselves or by something else, i.e. a pre-written movement script or another person's hand being modeled altogether. Patients very often misidentified the source of the actions happening on screen. Experiment 3. This experiment evaluated empathetic abilities in schizophrenic patients. They found that schizophrenics possessed the same emotional empathy capabilities as healthy controls, but lacked in perspective taking. They failed to correctly identify why someone would perform an action. Martin Brune explores most of this in more detail, but we're also drawing from some other sources here. He talks about how many of the classic symptoms of schizophrenia could be explained by a damaged representation of self. Their inability to correctly identify the source of an action might be an explanation for a sense of paranoia. Another related cause could be not understanding other people's intentions and developing a sense of grandeur in which they often think that others are out to get them. For example, picture a scene in which you notice your friends talking, they see you, and come over to talk. While we might see this as a common, uninteresting occurrence, subjects, when seeking to explain or recall the incident, will often make unreasonable connections, assuming that their friends were talking about you, for instance, or that they were waiting for you to arrive. Auditory or visual hallucinations can also be attributed to common phenomenon happening that the patient is unable to identify the source of. Without a clear understanding of their place or the roles of others, subjects have problems conversing or reading, not being able to identify the illocutionary act of a verbal exchange, or not phrasing their speech in such a way that anybody but themselves would understand, skipping over details that are incorrectly assumed to be common knowledge, and even taking metaphors literally. As you can see, a lack of theory of self affects many daily activities.